On today's show, a Friday night mailbag about the Atlanta Hawks. Your questions, my answers, and it's all coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1971 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Friday evening here in early to mid-May, and I want to encourage you, as I always do at the top of the show, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find your podcast. On the video side, we are on YouTube, so please like this video as you are watching it, comment, share, etc., and also please subscribe and download on the audio platforms of your choice, Apple, Spotify, Overcast, etc. It's been very busy around the Atlanta Hawks, as it almost pretty much always is. And we're ramping up to that point of the offseason where it actually starts to get pretty interesting in a hurry. Obviously, there's some playoff stuff going on. Most of this podcast will be mailbag driven with your questions that I'll be answering, including this first segment to some degree as well. There's a little bit of news, and I got a lot of questions about it, so it's kind of just like one of those intro segments. But still, that's the relevant. It's kind of the relevant daily thing right now is the front office search for the Hawks about their president of basketball operations job. And then again, later on in the podcast, questions about Dyson Daniels, questions about the NBA draft lottery, which, by the way, arrives on Monday evening, everything in between. But we'll start with the front office and the latest there. The NBA draft combine begins on Sunday in Chicago. So 2 days from now, as I'm recording this podcast, that's basically the unofficial start of the offseason for a lot of teams. Obviously, teams have been eliminated for a while, including the Hawks. But the first league-wide event, really, that's in bold letters, is the combine, which again starts on Sunday. And the NBA draft lottery begins on Monday with a lot of the league in Chicago. That'll be obviously very, very impactful for all kinds of franchises, including the Hawks. I say that in part because the Hawks do not have still a person to lead their front office. They are still looking for president of basketball operations as of Friday evening. It's still a little bit murky as to who the candidates are. I've heard mixed things, honestly, in recent days about how narrow the candidate pool still is. As I reported earlier this week, the Hawks, I was told, did double-digit interviews of candidates. Now, they've probably narrowed that down to some degree by now. I've heard different numbers of how many candidates are still really in the mix for the Hawks. But one thing's for sure, as of Friday night, nothing is definitive right now. There's lots of whispers like there almost always is, but nothing definitive at this moment in time. Earlier today, Mark Stein, Jake Fisher, over at the Stein line on Substack, reported some stuff about the Hawks on this topic, so I wanted to give a little bit of a look at what they actually said and kind of give my thoughts and my spin on that. The first thing they reported is that the Hawks have at least attempted to pursue Bob Myers for that job, which I've also heard has happened, but they have not had any success in doing so, which I've also heard the same. If you heard the show recently in the last couple of weeks, I've expressed, I would say, the belief that it was not likely that Myers would be a candidate because of what he would like to do more than the Hawks. I think he has a good job right now at ESPN. The Hawks can pay him a lot of money, but it seems like the whispers that I've heard are backed up here by Stein and Fisher that Myers is a long shot to actually be interested on the Hawks side. The second thing in that piece from Mark and Jake, citing league sources, they said that the Hawks have at least shown some interest at looking at quote, established agents in their president search. So basically, that would be in tandem with Antti Sala, who's currently the GM and the person leading the operation at this very moment. This is pretty interesting, I would say. There's been some mixed results, I would say, with the agent approach in front offices. There have been some successes for sure. Bob Myers was a former agent, for example. That worked out pretty well in Golden State. Rob Pelinka with the Lakers has a very mixed record, I would say, if you look at all the moves that he has done. But it hasn't been a total disaster, obviously, and there's been some high highs. Obviously, the Luka trade most recently, but they built a title contender and a title winner when he was there, etc. You have Leon Rose with the Knicks right now in New York. It's gone pretty well. They've been a good team, and this year very good. A chance to make the conference finals or beyond this year. And both Mark and Jake pointed to Rose and Pelinka as examples of what the structure can look like. That's fair to say, for sure. What I will add is the Lakers and the Knicks are not really franchises you can lump in with most of the rest of the league because of the markets that they're in. They are the flagship franchises, not the only ones. People would probably add Boston in there, Golden State or whatever. But obviously, it's pretty difficult to say that the circumstances are the same in Atlanta or Indiana or pick your team, Milwaukee, pick your Western Conference teams, Utah, Portland, whatever, than it is with LA and New York. So it's a little bit different, I would say. It doesn't mean it's impossible or that anything's wrong with what they've done, but I like to see a little bit more evidence of the agent model in a non-glamour market. And while Atlanta, as I always stress to people or in my life, is a big market team in the NBA, they're not viewed that way in the NBA. Atlanta's not the same as New York or LA for basketball purposes with the NBA and history and all those things. The Hawks don't have that kind of fan base, even much. I hope they do at some point. But you know what I mean? The Lakers and Knicks are not exactly the normal test cases when it comes to evaluating NBA franchises. Now, of course, the other prominent example recently is Nico Harrison with the Mavs, who is very infamous at this moment in time for the Luka trade. Obviously, his results have been kind of mixed. There's been some good actually in Dallas. Like they got Kyrie for very cheap. That worked out very, very well. They made some very, I would say, short-term focused trades that actually have kind of worked. Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington, etc. But then there's the Luka trade. And again, even if you don't like Luka, which I know a lot of Hawks fans don't for obvious reasons, there's like a connection there. That trade was a disaster, not only because of the Luka and AD part of it, but because of the process involved. And I'm a big process person. And the process of not asking any other team and just making a deal that was very obviously an underpay in asset cost was one that the entire league, and I've not spoken to any person in the league, agent, team, person, whatever, that thought that was a good process. Even if you don't like Luka, it was still a bad transaction because they didn't test the market, basically. It's one transaction. You don't want to say he's like useless because of that, but it is notable that like it's been mixed results on the agent front. So all that said, I think the Hawks could seriously go down this agent path. I've heard a little bit of whisper about that as like a real thing that they're considering doing. They have had a former agent in an advisory role the last couple of years, which is very different than actually having that person run the team. But this is not crazy. I'll say that right now. I'm not against this thought at all. It just depends on who it is and the influence and all those things. So the theory would basically be in very broad terms that agents have relationships in the league. They can be the kind of the lead recruiter, the relationship manager, all those things. And then you have Ansi Sala already on the staff that kind of becomes like the strategist person. Like Ansi is well regarded for his strategy and not just like, I've seen people talk about him like as a cap guy. He can do that, but he's definitely more of a strategist overall. Like he's an analytics guy. Like he knows a lot of things about basketball, team building. It's not just the cap stuff. He knows all that side of things. So different executives have different strengths. That's the reality in a front office. Like if you have a scout-focused GM lead person, like for instance, Travis Schlenk would always kind of say even about himself, like he was a scout first. That's one kind of brand of GM/Pobo candidate, right? The scout first guys. Then you have former players that can kind of be more scouty, but whatever. You have the relationship people like former agents or whatever. There's different roles. You have different, Daryl Morey was a stats guy first. Like there's different kinds of building and relationships and also priorities of like skill sets basically in a front office. But I would not be averse to this to the right agent in a prominent role. I think it actually would make more sense with the Hawks than most teams because they've already kind of committed to Ansi Sala in a pretty prominent role, and he's someone who's definitely respected around the league. So pairing him with a relationship guy kind of does make kind of sense, big picture. Now, again, that's just without a name attached, but there you go. I would just hesitate to use New York and LA as the examples to bolster because due respect, like team building is a lot easier with Lakers than it is with like every other team in the league because they could just get guys that want to play there. It's very simple sometimes. Like there's the Lakers exceptionalism. That's a real thing. It doesn't always work that way, but a lot of times that stuff just falls in their laps. That's not what's going to happen in Atlanta, most likely. So I'll say this also, part of being a president of basketball operations, and actually had a very interesting conversation with someone I would describe as a league source today that was kind of about this, about how when you're hiring a lead executive, a big part of their job that's always like under discussed outside the league is managing your owner, managing up. More so like making decisions, like you have to get the owner to buy into what you're doing. And that's not a small thing to do. You have to coax the owner into spending money, to not getting in the way, not overruling you. That is actually a very logical thing. If you've worked in any normal industry like I have, you kind of have to manage up as well to make sure that you're not going to get overruled and get like, especially in sports, like the owner has to sign the check. It's a very big deal. So that's part of this too. I don't know how much of that's going to be management, but a lot of irons in the fire here, but the agent thing I have heard is a real possibility. We'll see what names are attached, and then we'll see if that actually happens at some point in time. Last thing quickly here, there are still like no prominently new names that have been reported in the mainstream consciousness as a redux of what has already been said. Calvin Booth's been out there. Monty McNair's been out there. Danny Ferry's been out there. Sharif Abdul-Rahim's been out there. And Travis Hansen's been out there. Also, I believe Elton Brand was reported, as I said earlier this week, actually, to have withdrawn. Sometimes you have someone that's not going to get a job anyway that withdraws. I've heard some other names, but not. I don't have them firm enough to share them publicly. I have that reporting standard that sometimes is pesky, and often maybe I should share more, but I don't want to be wrong. So that's one of those. Like, I've heard some other names kicking around unofficially, unconfirmed, but the stuff that's been out there enough to where I can just talk about it openly is the guys I just named: Booth, Ferry, McNair, Abdul-Rahim, Hansen, and then a couple of agents I've heard the names floated. I'm not sure if they're the guys, but a couple of other like former executives, et cetera, et cetera. So still a wide net. Like I said, double-digit candidates, and we'll see if the list gets narrowed. And look, I'll say this now. I'm recording this Friday night. It got up over the weekend. Like, we're in that stage now where I led with this for a reason about how the timeline is going. They don't have to have a president by the time the combine starts, but we're in that stage where, like, if you want that person to make decisions this summer, and it's a big summer for the Hawks, as I've been talking about a lot the last few weeks. For me, it's like you want to have that guy in place as soon as you possibly can. So it's crunch time there. If they hire someone over the weekend, I'll do a podcast as soon as I can. But in the meantime, we're just holding our breath. That's the big news item of the day for the Hawks. Okay, in a second, I'll get into some mailbag questions about all kinds of things around Atlanta, Dyson Daniels, the draft lottery, etc. First, though, from our partners on the podcast. NBA fans, you know what time it is. Playoff season makes big performances and even bigger rewards. And DoorDash is bringing the heat this season with a slam dunk deal for DashPass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player has 50 points or more, that's a lot of points. DashPass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use the code Wingstop50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. If you're looking at food delivery and just thought that there has to be a better way, you should check out DoorDash. It's with DashPass, $0 delivery fees, and exclusive just like this one. And just imagine how much you could save over a full season with DoorDash and DashPass. So here's the play. Sign up for DashPass right now to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. And when any player at 50 points or more in a playoff game, if you're a member with DashPass, you can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo of Wingstop the next day with a $20 plus order and code Wingstop50. That's DashPass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. All right, and to the mailbag. The first question on this particular podcast comes from Josh, who says, you and Robbie talked about how the playoffs are showing the teams need players that cannot be exploited on one end of the floor, and how that need is greater when you're building around a player like Trae Young. Are there any players in the current core that you're concerned with when it comes to being exposed like that in a playoff situation? So a good time and opportunity to kind of plug this podcast I did with Robbie Cowland of CBS Sports on Thursday. So if you missed that one, listen to that. A lot of playoff talk in there, but some Hawk stuff in there as well. And also earlier this week, I discussed a lot of stuff about the Hawks team-building-wise with Glenn Willis on a two-part episode, and that was a fun conversation, plus the storylines from the summer. So it's been a busy week on the show, but that one from Robbie is worth listening to for the backstory to this conversation. Part of the answer to Josh's question comes down to what you think the actual core is for the Hawks. As we discussed on that show, and it's obviously very clear if you pay attention to the league, there are trade-offs to having Trae Young, but he's so good on offense that it's not like he's getting exposed or played off the floor in the way that's kind of being talked about here. So put him to the side. Obviously, he is the player that has the strongest weakness of the Hawks players with his defense. Also the strongest offense. Maybe you could say Dyson's defense is similar to Trae's offense, but offense is more important than defense, generally speaking, when it comes to guard play. So anyway, regardless, put Trae to the side. That's part of this. Now, I personally believe that the core of the Hawks is Trae Young, Dyson Daniels, Zachary Shea, Jalen Johnson, and I would throw in Onyeka Okongwu. Now, the first four guys I named are obviously in the core. Trae, Dyson, Zach, Jalen. I think Okongwu is the fifth guy. You can debate it whether he's in the core or not. I would throw him in there, but as the fifth guy of five. But that's kind of what I'm thinking about the core. But again, a lot of stuff really changes a lot depending on what you think the core actually is, if it's a bigger sample, etc. But if those are your five core guys, there isn't too much of a worry about any of those guys when it comes to being exploited on one end of the floor, other than Trey's defense again. Obviously, I think right now it's clear that Ricochet is the worst of the 5 players like today, because he's a 20-year-old rookie who was a 19-year-old rookie. Like, he's going to improve. He's already pretty good. And by the way, he projects to be a two-way player, very obviously. So he's the worst of the 5 right now. He's also the youngest and has pedigree and not worried at all about Ricochet in the slightest. Jalen Johnson, two-way guy, very obviously. Some believe that Okongwu is like not a good defender. Like, I don't think he's great there, but he is certainly not bad there. He is small. But for me, in a playoff setting, I'm not really worried about Okongwu being played off the floor at all. It is totally fine to question whether he is all capital letters like the guy at center. I lean higher on him than some seems to because of his size. I get all that. That's a different discussion. But I think, put that to the side for a second, there's no reason to believe that he can't play real minutes in a playoff series because he is able to play and play versatily in different schemes. He can defend. He can defend on the floor. Offensively, he's solid. So, like, this competition about being played off the floor, being exploited because you're a weak link, he's not going to be that on either end of the floor, to me. So, other than Trey's defense, probably the most questionable end of the floor for any of these guys is Dyson Daniels' offense because of the shooting. Like, that's one area, like, it's as we discussed with Robbie on the show yesterday, there are 2 ways to be played off the floor in a playoff series. On offense, if you can't shoot and you're a perimeter player, teams will just flat out ignore you and game plan around that and be able to play 4-on-5, basically. 5-on-4 of the other guys. That can be, not always, but it can be very limiting to your offense if you have guys who cannot shoot and who they ignore entirely. On defense, it's very easy to see. Like, if you can hold up, you can hold up. If you have a bad defending center in space in the playoffs, you're cooked. Obviously, with Trey, you have one shaky defender already, so you can't really have another one. All those things. So that's kind of the preface here. Before I keep going, Dyson did improve a lot on offense this year. There's a reason he won Most Improved Player, and it wasn't just the defense. Obviously, the defense was the calling card for that, but he didn't quite – people, I don't think, caught on to how good he was on offense at times this year. He improved three-point shooting, 34%, totally fine. He attacked the seams of his defense quite a bit. He passes pretty well for a non-point guard. All those things. He's already very good and is very young. With that out of the way, it's at least possible you get into a series and have the opponent basically daring Dyson to shoot. And that could cause issues if he's not willing to shoot or if he misses like a bunch of shots in a row, confidence problems. We saw a little tiny bit of that at the end of this year where he wasn't like getting totally ignored, but teams were willing to play off him. And that's probably the right decision at this point in time. So he's still young enough. You don't worry about it. And to be very clear, I'm not worried about this, but if you picked one of the core guys that had a potential to have a one-way issue, it'd probably be Dyson's offense. That'd be my pick of those 5 guys. Obviously, the other one, again, besides Trey's defense, which we already are kind of baking in a little bit here. Now, if you want to expand the concept of the core a little bit to something bigger, I think a lot of fans would point to Mo Gay, for instance, as a core piece of this team. I would not go that far. I like Mo. I think Mo is going to be pretty good, but core is too far for me. With that said, his offense would be the answer to this question. If you include him, his offense is the worst side of the floor for any of these guys pretty comfortably. Mo is not unplayable offensively, but there's a real weakness there, I would say, which is why he's not playing at the level of these other guys. Mo's defense is very, very impressive and intriguing, but the offense is pretty darn limiting at this moment in time. For example, Dyson is a much more effective offensive player than Mo is. That's just naturally what that is. So that's a real question. If you want to go even deeper, and I would not go this far, but if you want to go like, there was part of the question that I didn't answer because it was a long question about like the team that was the rotation from this last season. Are there any guys on that team in the playoff series? And I would say, George Niang is a good example of a guy who might be, not will be, but might be unplayable in certain series defensively. That's a very obvious thing to point out. I think Niang's defense is better than people believe that it is because he is so slow. It just looks bad at times. But in certain matchups, he might be tough to put out there. That's an example of a one-way kind of player. Mo's offense is another example of that. So I'm trying to throw out a lot of examples on purpose here to kind of answer the question. But part of the beauty, to bring this full circle, part of the beauty of what the Hawks are trying to build, what they actually have been building in the last couple of years, is that they're young guys like Jalen Johnson, like Zachary Ricochet, and then even for me, like I think Okongwu is on that level, or not quite the level of like untouchability, but certainly a two-way player. and Dyson's getting there too. But especially with Jalen and Zach as like their two young pillars, they profile as legitimately two-way players that can hold up on offense and defense. And those guys are really hard to find. I say this all the time on the show. Two-way wings and two-way forwards are something that every single team in the league is always looking for. The Hawks already have two of them, and they still want another one because you can't have too many of these guys. But the Hawks right now at 2 through 4, Dyson, Zach, Jalen can all defend. That's not a small thing. You have to have that, especially when, again, your point guard is Trae Young. So long story short, it helps to have guys that are two-way players that you're not worried about. There's still some questions for sure, but that is part of the team building philosophy that they've had recently. Obviously, it might change to some degree with a new president, but they do want to, and I think they probably acknowledge, and I know they do behind the scenes, there are limitations to building around Trae. But when you have that guy who is a legitimate superstar offensive creator and has been for a long time, to build around him, you want to fill it out with guys who can play offense and defense. And that is what the Hawks are trying to do. So hopefully that answers the question in some sort of deep dive fashion. Okay, more to come in a second, including a question about Dyson Daniels and a question about the draft lottery. But first, a word from our partners on the show. Did you know that your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV in your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices with no console required. Just grab your pair controller, subscribe or sign in to Xbox Game Plus Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. You can dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty. You can do it as easily as you stream your favorite shows. Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning-fast speeds that you actually need to stay competitive in that world. And a Fire TV Stick 4K is also more affordable, easy to travel with, which allows you to take your games anywhere that you plug in. And if you ever want to try out an Xbox game without the big upfront cost of the console, Fire TV Stick 4K is going to be a low-pressure way to start exploring. With Fire TV Stick 4K, everything is also in one place, including more than 1.5 million movies and TV shows and episodes from Netflix and Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. Plus, the possibilities are, frankly, endless. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max for 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, question from Ty, who says, I heard the Dyson Daniels interview after he won Most Improved Player, and he said he thinks he can win it again. Do you believe that's really possible? And what would that look like? So if you missed this, Dyson Daniels, of course, won Most Improved Player last week, 2 weeks ago, and the Atlanta media talked to him on Zoom. I was on that call for about 20 minutes with Dyson. I played the entire thing for you on the same podcast feed, and he talked about winning the Most Improved Player award and maybe doing it again. That was what got a lot of attention after the fact nationally. The full quote was, quote, I feel like I can win Most Improved Player again. I had that much more in me and a bigger leap to take, end quote. So 2 things here. Number 1, no player has ever won it more than once. Never happened in the awards history. Number 2 is you are allowed to win it again. There's no reason why you can't win it again, just other than like the parameters of the award. So for a while in like the 90s and early 2000s, it was pretty common for like non-star offensive players to win Most Improved Player. For example, the following guys have won Most Improved Player in this sample: Darrell Armstrong, former Hawk Allen Henderson, Boris Diaw, who was not with the Hawks when he won it, but he was a former Hawk as well. Ike Austin, George Murasan won Most Improved Player back in the day. All those guys averaged 15 points a game or less in the season that they actually won the award. Since then, though, it is mostly guys who made big leaps on offense by the numbers. Now, Dyson breaks that mold a little bit, which is why it's coming up here. The last 5 winners in a row before Dyson averaged 23 points a game or more when they won the award. Tyrese Maxey, Lauri Markkanen, John Morant, Julius Randle, and Brandon Ingram. All like offensive first players with big like scoring numbers. Realistically, those guys are not going to win the award again. Because once you get to that level, you're probably going to win the award when you have to like jump another level in the numbers. Because look, the numbers do matter in this award. You can debate on whether they should or not. They probably should matter less than they do, the counting stats, but they do tend to matter. Let's just be real. Dyson won in part because of the steals numbers that he had. Dyson's offensive numbers were improved, but the defensive stuff is where he really kind of popped into the national consciousness. Anyway, 10 of the last 12 winners of the award averaged at least 20 points per game. Dyson averaged the fewest points per game, by an MIP winner since 2006. So all that said, if there is an archetype that could win the award again, it's probably someone like Dyson. Because the biggest thing is he has to have a jump offensively to win it again. He has, of course, the rock-solid, ridiculous numbers defensively that help him win the award. But if he suddenly averaged 20 points a game on good efficiency, he would be in the mix again. I don't know if he'd win it again. That's the pathway to do it, in short. So, like, to be very clear, I would certainly bet against him winning the award again. That's just the numbers of it all. Like it's not likely to happen ever. So if you don't think that's not going to happen ever, then one guy probably won't do it. But if he did have the big jump, he might win it. There might be some voters that might not vote for him again because, he already won this award once, whatever. Plus, like, there is a reality that Dyson may never average the defensive numbers again they did this year. Well, it's not quite that much. So people might argue that he actually got worse defensively, which I would not argue probably at that point in time. Anyway, I think it's possible for him to win again. It is also unlikely, like very unlikely for him to win again. It would take a big scoring leap from him, which I think is probably not going to happen, especially I like Dyson. I would certainly bet the under on 20-point-per-game seasons for Dyson in his career. He could do it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would bet the under on that. So, interesting question. I think it's good that he said that, and I think he believes it. Dyson's a very confident, but also a smart, mature young guy. But I also don't think he's going to win it again. So that's the reality. Even if I do believe it though. If there is a kind of player that might win it twice, it could be someone like Dyson. So there you go. Last thing before we get out of here, a question from Caden who says, which team winning the lottery would be the worst for the Hawks, and which one would be the best for the Hawks? So this is debatable. Just as a reminder, the Hawks cannot win the lottery themselves. If they win their own pick is actually in the lottery, but it would go to San Antonio no matter what. And the Kings win the lottery, it doesn't go to the Hawks. So the Hawks can't win themselves. Off the board. Atlanta has a 96% chance to get the Kings pick. We'll see if they get it. That's long story short. The worst result is probably the Kings because it would directly impact the Hawks and not give them that pick. That's probably the single worst result. One more that could be messy is the Spurs. The Hawks have a pick swap with them next season in 26. And also, this doesn't matter to me because my attitude and really the reality is the picks to San Antonio are gone and nothing the Hawks do affects that. They're just gone and it's a sunk cost. But let's be real. The PR and the backlash if the Spurs win the lottery with the Hawks pick would be really, really bad. It's going to annoy me if that happens. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the thing because, look, you can't just say, the Hawks traded Cooper Flagg. We don't know what would have happened, all that stuff. It's a sunk cost, but that will be a story if that happens. It probably won't. It's 1% chance or more, or less. There you go. Similarly, the Pelicans would be a team to root against because the Hawks have a 2027 first-round pick as part of the Dyson trade that includes part of the Pelicans. So you don't want them to be too good in the future. And then in less direct fashion, I would say rooting against the Sixers is probably a good idea for the Hawks because if they get Cooper Flagg to go along with, yes, Embiid is an injury risk, but if they get Cooper Flagg to go with Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Daryl Morey as the GM, that's not good for a team in the East when the Hawks want to win the East. So I'd root against Philly probably in addition to Sacramento, San Antonio, and New Orleans. On the best case side, probably just a team from the West that doesn't impact the Hawks directly. Like, honestly, I think Utah is the best combination of, like, doesn't really impact the Hawks and also, like, could happen. Utah is one of the top 3 teams in the lottery. If they win, like, the impact on the Hawks is pretty much none, like, because they're in the West. There's no pick swaps or anything like that. Portland would be another one. Portland would be fun, number one, if they won the lottery because they have a lot of young talent, but also just not related to the Hawks really at all. I think, generally speaking, you don't want Cooper Flagg to go to the East if you are the Hawks, only the Hawks. But I am less bothered if it's like Toronto or Brooklyn, even Washington. Like, I know they're in the division, but Washington's pretty far away. And the only impact of them being in the division is playing them one more time per season. Not the biggest deal in the world. So, like, that was my answer for, like, just the Hawks perspective. I think rooting for Utah, I mean, even Charlotte, like, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to me. I'm not, like, angry about that, but I think it would be Utah would be number one probably on my rooting list if I was the Hawks. Portland, again, whatever. But There are no like total disasters other than Sacramento and San Antonio, I would say. So we'll see how that goes. And those guys, by the way, those are very, very unlikely. I think there's a different thing about the league in general. Like as someone who covers the league beyond the Hawks, I'd be intrigued by Cooper Flag a lot of different places. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit next week. But from the Hawks standpoint, the biggest thing by far is not who wins the lottery, but where the Kings pick lands. So there's a chance that because I'm recording this Friday night, if there's no news over the weekend, I may not record again until post-lottery because the lottery is on Monday. If that happens, just know that Hawks fans, you want the Kings to be 13 or 14. That's really the biggest thing by far for Atlanta heading into Monday. Stay tuned for that, and we'll get into more of the reaction, the fallout, etc. We'll talk about more prospects. I have some draft guests planned. The draft's still like 7 weeks away at this point in time, so it's still a long way to go, but plenty to talk about because if the Hawks have 2 picks, the range will be very wide. We'll get into all that stuff and more. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast today. As always, we have more to come. So if you're new to the show, we do not go away at all in the offseason. In fact, it's just the same tempo. We're still doing 5 shows a week on average, basically, this time of year. So please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Follow the show on X/Twitter at Locked On Hawks. I am there at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. And please also follow my non-podcast Hawks coverage at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody, enjoy your weekend. There's some weekend listening for you. And we're back at the very latest after the lottery on Monday.